If you missed it, pull up the deceptive and disheartening eulogy for journalism written as an op-ed earlier this year by former Baltimore Sun journalist and creator of HBO's The Wire, David Simon. Writing in the Washington Post, Simon explained, quote, "Is there a separate elegy to be written for that generation of newspaper men and women who came of age after Vietnam, after the Pentagon Papers, and Watergate? For us, starry-eyed acolytes of a glamorous new church, all of us secular and cynical and dedicated to the notion that though we would still be stained with ink, we were no longer quite wretches. Where is our special requiem? Bright and shiny we were in the late 1970s, packed into our bursting journalism schools, dog-eared paperback copies of All the President's Men and the Powers That Be, atop our Associated Press style books. No business school called to us, no engineering lab, no information age computer degree. We had seen a future of substance in bylines and column inches. Immortality lay in a 5-part series with sidebars in the Tribune, the Sun, the Register, the Post, the Express." That was a quote from Simon, and now Moyers says, "But it's not just about us journalists." Simon goes on to chronicle the effects that cross-cutting and consolidation has had in the business and in the communities where those businesses have made so much money. He says, "I did not encounter a sustained period in which anyone endeavored to spend what it would actually cost to make the Baltimore Sun the most essential and deep-thinking and well-written account of life in Central Maryland. The people you needed to gather for that kind of storytelling were ushered out the door, buyout after buyout." Or pull up the perceptive analysis of the state of newspaper journalism in the recent New Yorker, written by my good friend Eric Alterman. Quote, "It is impossible not to wonder what would become of not just news but democracy itself in a world in which we can no longer depend on newspapers to invest their unmatched resources and professional pride in helping the rest of us to learn, however imperfectly, what we need to know. For example, we needed to know the truth about Iraq. The truth could have spared that country from rack and ruin, saved thousands of American lives and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, and freed hundreds of billions of dollars for investment in the American economy and infrastructure. But as Knight Ridder reporters told us at the time, one of the few organizations that systematically and independently set out to challenge the claims of the administration, as the Knight Ridder reporters told us at the time, as my colleagues and I reported in our documentary on PBS, Buying the War, as Scott McClellan has now confessed, and as the Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed just this week, the administration, with the complicity of the dominant media, conducted a political propaganda campaign using erroneous and misleading intelligence to deceive Americans into supporting an unprovoked war on another country, leading to a conflict that, instead of being over quickly and bloodlessly, as predicted, continues to this day into its 6th year. We now know that a neoconservative is an arsonist who sets the house on fire and 6 years later boasts that no one can put it out. You couldn't find a more revealing measure of the state of the dominant media today than the continuing ubiquitous presence on the air and in print of the very pundits and experts, self-selected message multipliers of a disastrous foreign policy who got it all wrong in the first place. It goes to show when the bar is low enough, you can never be too wrong," Moyers says in his speech. He continues, of course there is another measure of the state of our dominant media, and that's something William Cope and I know very well. There's another measure of the state of our dominant media, and that's their own state of denial about their role as what McClellan himself calls deferential complicit enablers. And it was John Walcott who took on his own colleagues in the dominant media and said, quote, "They ask a lot of questions, but they ask even the right questions of the wrong people," unquote. I'm not nearly as eloquent as Bill Moyers. I'm not as knowledgeable as Seymour Hersh. I don't have access to his unnamed government sources that supply Seymour with information. But I have access to other information by virtue of the fact that I was born in 1954 and grew up during the Cold War. Recently I learned how Ronald Reagan defeated the Soviet Union, or thought he did, and that is through the very Islamic radicals whose hatred has now been focused on America specifically and the West in general. Ronald Reagan used these radical Islamists against the Soviet Union as proxy soldiers to terrorize the Soviets, and terrorize them they did. But somehow these proxy soldiers of the USA were turned into proxy soldiers of the communists against the USA. And that's what led to 9/11. 9/11 is an element of, a continuation of, a part of the ongoing Cold War, which never ended. The Cold War never ended. The Cold War continues in a resurrected fashion today. These same newsmen, such as Bill Moyers, well-meaning, sincere, are in effect sleeper agents planted by the Soviet Union in an effort to drive the United States out of Vietnam. Vietnam was a battle of the Cold War. Vietnam must be seen in the context of the Cold War. It was a battle in a larger war. We lost the Vietnam battle because of the media. Because of the media and the influence of Soviet agents in this country who took root in organizations such as the Sierra Club, such as the American Civil Liberties Union, who took root inside our own government, especially the State Department, the Defense Department. Daniel Ellsberg, unknowingly to him, he didn't know he was a sleeper. The movie and the book Telephone is a good analogy. Telephone, in the movie version, it starred Charles Bronson. It depicted agents, sleeper agents, placed in the United States years ago by the Soviet Union, so well brainwashed that they themselves had no idea that they were agents. Moyers and Hersh, Amy Goodman, Oberman, Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, PETA, Rainforest Network, Earth Island Institute, intellectuals in academia, in the media, have no idea that they are sleeper agents. That is an apt way of explaining these people who are re-energized, awakened from sleep, set in motion by the Iraq War. Not exactly as planned, but fortuitously for the Soviets, the former Soviets, who now call themselves the Russian Federation.